There is a baby girl lying in her crib. She is healthy. She is fed. She is safe inside the most protected palace in the world, surrounded by servants whose only job is to make sure nothing goes wrong. Her mother visits her, spends time with her, holds her. The servants see this. They remember it later when they are questioned. The mother was tender. The mother was present. The mother seemed like any other mother visiting her infant child. Then the mother leaves, and sometime after that, in the silence of the palace, in the particular quiet that only exists in places where everyone is always listening, the baby stops breathing. By the time anyone finds her, she is already gone. And the mother is screaming, not in grief, in accusation. She is pointing her finger at the emperor's first wife, the woman who had every reason to want this baby dead, the woman who had been her rival since the beginning, the woman who had the most to gain from the death of a child that was not hers. The emperor believes her. The first wife is arrested, tortured, executed, and the woman who had visited her infant daughter that afternoon, the woman whose baby had died, under circumstances that have never been fully explained, whose grief was loud and public, and perfectly timed, that woman takes the first wife's place beside the emperor, one step closer to the throne. History has debated for 14 centuries whether she killed her own child to get there. History has never been able to prove that she did not. Her name was Wu Zetian. She started as a concubine, the lowest rung of imperial power, a woman owned by the palace, a decoration in silk, a face in a crowd of faces, all competing for a moment of imperial attention. She ended as the only woman in 4,000 years of Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own name, not regent, not consort, not the power behind the throne, the emperor, and the road she walked to get there, the bodies she stepped over, the enemies she destroyed, the systems she dismantled and rebuilt in her own image, makes every other rise to power in this channel's history look cautious by comparison. This is Wu Zetian, the Dragon Empress, the woman history tried to bury. We are digging her up today. To understand what Wu Zetian achieved, you first have to understand what she was supposed to be. She was born in 624 AD in the Tang Dynasty, one of the most culturally brilliant periods in Chinese history. The Tang court was sophisticated, cosmopolitan, genuinely remarkable in its openness to art, literature, trade, and ideas from across the known world. In many ways, it was the most advanced civilization on Earth at the time. And in this brilliant, sophisticated cosmopolitan world, a woman's options were almost completely fixed from birth. You were born into a family. You were educated to the degree your family considered appropriate, sometimes substantially, sometimes minimally. You were married, arranged by your family into a household that suited their interests. You produced children. You managed the domestic sphere. You died. If you were extraordinarily lucky, or extraordinarily beautiful, or both, you might enter the imperial harem, the collection of concubines maintained by the emperor, ranked in a strict hierarchy, competing for imperial attention in the hope of producing a son who might one day inherit the throne and elevate your status accordingly. This was considered a good outcome for a woman. Wu Zetian entered the imperial harem at 14 years old. Emperor Taizong, one of the most celebrated rulers in Chinese history, the man who had built the Tang dynasty into a genuine superpower, selected her personally. She was given the title Kairen, fifth-rank concubine, not the bottom of the hierarchy, but nowhere near the top. She was 14. She was in a palace full of women, all competing for the attention of one man. She had no particular political allies, no powerful family connections that could elevate her quickly, no obvious path to anything beyond exactly what she was. A beautiful girl in a silk dress in a room full of beautiful girls in silk dresses. What she had instead was her mind. Contemporary sources describe Wu as exceptionally well-read for a woman of her time and background. She had been educated by her father, himself an educated man who had apparently decided, unusually for the era, that his daughter's intelligence was worth cultivating. She knew history. She knew literature. She knew, crucially, how power worked, who had it, how they kept it, what happened to people who challenged it carelessly. She watched. She learned. She waited. Emperor Taizong reportedly noticed her intelligence as much as her beauty. He gave her the nickname Media, meaning something close to charming and capable. He brought her into more active roles around the palace, not simply as a decorative presence, but as someone he could actually talk to. But Taizong had many concubines, and Wu Zetian remained fifth rank for the entirety of his reign. When Taizong died in 649, Wu was 24 years old, and by the strict law of the Tang dynasty, what happened to concubines when an emperor died was fixed and brutal. They went to a Buddhist convent, shaved heads, simple robes, the rest of their lives in prayer and silence. Removed from the world entirely, never to remarry, never to return to court. This was considered merciful. In earlier dynasties, the concubines had simply been buried with the emperor. Wu Zetian spent approximately 1 year in that convent, then she came back. The new emperor was Gaozong, Taizong's son, the man who now sat on the dragon throne. He had known Wu Zetian before. When she was his father's concubine, they had met in the palace. Something had developed between them. Exactly what? The sources are discreet about, because what it implied was deeply problematic. A son developing feelings for his fathers. Concubine was not simply a romantic complication. It was a violation of ritual propriety, so serious it could theoretically undermine the legitimacy of an entire reign. Gaozong brought her back from the convent anyway. This tells you almost everything you need to know about Wu Zetian's particular gift. She had made herself indispensable to a man before he became emperor. She had cultivated a connection that survived a year of Buddhist isolation and the vast social machinery designed to make exactly this kind of return impossible. She came back to court not as a fifth-rank concubine. She came back at a significantly elevated status and with Gaozong's personal attention focused entirely on her. She was now operating at a different level entirely, but she was not the empress yet. That position belonged to Empress Wang, Gaozong's official wife, a woman from a powerful aristocratic family, a woman whose position was protected by family connections, tradition, and the fundamental structure of the Tang imperial system. Between Wu Zetian and the throne stood Empress Wang and an entire civilization's worth of rules about how power was supposed to work. Wu Zetian began systematically dismantling every single one of them. The exact sequence of events that led to Empress Wang's downfall is one of the most debated questions in Chinese historical scholarship. What the sources agree on is the outcome. What they disagree on, fiercely across 14 centuries, is the mechanism. Wu Zetian had given birth to a daughter, her first child with Gaozong. In the politics of the imperial harem, a daughter was less valuable than a son. Sons were heirs. Daughters were diplomatic tools. But a child was still evidence of imperial favor, still a connection to the emperor, still a living demonstration of Wu Zetian's position. Empress Wang visited the infant. Wu Zetian was not present during the visit. Shortly after, the exact timing varies depending on which source. You read the baby was found dead. Wu Zetian accused Empress Wang of killing her child. Gaozong believed the accusation, or chose to believe it. Empress Wang was arrested, investigated, and ultimately removed from her position. The formal process took some time. There was institutional resistance from the conservative Confucian court officials who considered the entire situation improper. But the direction was never really in doubt once Gaozong had committed to it. In 655, Wu Zetian became empress. Empress Wang and Gaozong's previous favorite concubine, a woman known as pure concubine Xiao, who had also been Wu Zetian's rival, were imprisoned. Their hands and feet were cut off. They were submerged in wine vats. They died. Wu Zetian reportedly said, as she ordered this, that now these women could get thoroughly drunk on their way to the next world. Then she turned to the rest of the court and began the next phase. The question that hangs over all of this: did she kill her own infant daughter to frame? Empress Wang cannot be definitively answered. Chinese historians have argued both sides for centuries. Those who believe she did point to the convenient timing, the perfect political result, and the demonstrated willingness to do whatever was necessary that Wu showed throughout her career. Those who defend her point to the complete absence of direct evidence and the possibility that the accusation was invented or exaggerated by hostile sources written after her death. What nobody argues is that she was innocent of everything else that followed. With Empress Wang gone and her position secured, Wu Zetian turned to the problem that every ruler who has risen through enemies faces immediately upon taking power. The enemies are still there. The Tang court was full of men, and they were almost entirely men who had opposed her elevation, who had argued against her publicly, who had documented objections to her legitimacy, who had family and factional connections to the people she had destroyed on her way up. These men were not going to simply accept what had happened and move on. Wu Zetian's solution was elegant and terrifying in equal measure. She built a network, not an army, not a formal institution with uniforms and titles, and bureaucratic structure that her enemies could see coming and prepare for. Something subtler and more devastating. A system of informants embedded throughout the court and the broader empire. Ordinary people, servants, minor officials, merchants, neighbors who reported directly to her on the activities, conversations, and associations of anyone she considered a potential threat. She created formal mechanisms for this. Anonymous accusation boxes were installed in the capital. Physical boxes where anyone could deposit a written accusation against anyone else, with guaranteed protection for the accuser. She appointed officials specifically tasked with processing these accusations and investigating them. She called the men who ran this system her hawks and owls. The hawks pursued targets aggressively and openly. The owls watched in silence and reported. The result was an atmosphere of surveillance so complete that the Tang court, one of the most sophisticated and educated aristocracies in the world, became paralyzed with caution. Men who had spoken freely for decades began measuring every word. Friendships became dangerous. Correspondence became evidence. The simple act of meeting privately with someone who had been accused of something was itself enough to generate an accusation. Two of her most notorious hawks were men named Suo Yuanli and Zhou Xing, names that entered Chinese historical consciousness as synonyms for cruelty so extreme it became almost theatrical. Zhou Xing's end is one of history's more satisfying ironies. He was eventually accused himself by a colleague who invited him to dinner, asked him hypothetically how one might best torture a confession out of a prisoner, listened carefully to his detailed answer, and then informed him that the hypothetical prisoner was him. The phrase that emerged from this moment, "Please step into the cauldron," became a Chinese idiom for being trapped by your own methods that is still used today. But before that ending, these men served Wu Zetian's purposes completely. The opposition that had existed when she took power was systematically identified, accused, tried, and eliminated. Some were executed, some were exiled to the furthest provinces of the empire. Some simply disappeared from the historical record in the particular way that people disappear when a powerful person decides they should not exist anymore. By the time she had finished this phase of consolidation, the Tang court looked almost entirely different from the one she had entered. While Wu Zetian was building her surveillance network and eliminating her enemies, something else was happening simultaneously. She was governing, and she was governing well. This is the part of her story that her critics, and she has had critics across 14 centuries who have been extremely motivated to find fault, struggle to explain away, because the evidence is simply too consistent to dismiss. She reformed the imperial examination system, the process by which men entered government service, making it more merit-based and less dependent on aristocratic birth. This was not a small adjustment. The aristocratic families that dominated Tang government had held their positions for generations, precisely because the system rewarded connection over capability. Wu Zetian's reforms directly undermined their structural advantage and opened the bureaucracy to men of genuine ability who came from lower social backgrounds. Those men became her allies. They were loyal to her specifically because she had created the conditions for their advancement. She expanded agricultural policy in ways that increased production and reduced famine in regions that had suffered chronically. She reduced the tax burden on the peasantry during difficult periods. She invested in infrastructure. She was also, throughout this period, effectively running the empire for an emperor who was increasingly unable to do so himself. Gaozong suffered from severe and progressively worsening health problems, likely a combination of conditions that caused chronic pain, vision problems, and cognitive difficulties. He relied on Wu Zetian not simply as a consort, but as a genuine co-ruler, consulting her on state matters, delegating decisions, eventually allowing her to conduct court alongside him. The Confucian court officials found this scandalous. Their objections are well documented. They argued at length and in writing about the impropriety of a woman exercising imperial authority, about the violation of natural order, about the dangerous precedent being set. Wu Zetian had them dealt with. Some were demoted, some were exiled, some were accused of crimes by the surveillance network and removed from their positions through the legal machinery she had built for exactly this purpose. She also, during this period, began cultivating a public image with extraordinary sophistication. She commissioned Buddhist art and temples on a significant scale, positioning herself as a defender and patron of Buddhism at a time when the religion's relationship with the imperial state was politically significant. She sponsored scholars. She wrote. She presented herself not as an anomaly, a woman doing what women were not supposed to do, but as a figure of cosmic inevitability, someone whose rise was not an accident of ambition, but a fulfillment of a larger pattern. She was, in other words, building the ideological infrastructure of absolute power, while simultaneously exercising it. Gaozong died in 683. Wu Zetian was 58 years old. What followed was a succession crisis that she managed with the same combination of patience and ruthlessness that had characterized her entire career. Two of her sons became emperor in quick succession, Zhongzong and then Ruizong. Both were her children. Both were, by the structural logic of the imperial system, the legitimate rulers. Neither actually ruled. Wu Zetian governed through them so completely and so openly that the fiction of their authority became embarrassing to maintain. Zhongzong was deposed within months by his own mother, who had him removed from the throne and replaced with his younger brother, when he showed insufficient willingness to be managed. Ruizong held the position for 7 years, while Wu Zetian exercised all actual power. Then in 690 she ended the performance entirely. She declared a new dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, her dynasty named for her family. Replacing the Tang, she took the title of Huangdi, emperor, not empress consort, not empress dowager, not regent. Emperor, the only woman in Chinese history to hold that title in her own right. She was 65 years old. She ruled for 15 more years. Those 15 years were not simply a footnote or a transitional period. She held court. She conducted foreign policy. She managed military campaigns, some successful, some less so. She continued her administrative reforms. She maintained the surveillance network. She executed people who challenged her and promoted people who served her well. She ruled. The Confucian historians who wrote about her after her death, almost entirely men who had ideological reasons to present female rule as inherently catastrophic, struggled to explain how the empire had not in fact collapsed during her reign. They emphasized her cruelties, her manipulations, her alleged crimes. They minimized her administrative competence and her policy successes. But the evidence they could not entirely suppress tells a different story. The Tang dynasty that her son Zhongzong restored after her death in 705, that dynasty survived for another 200 years. It survived because of the administrative infrastructure, the reformed bureaucracy, the agricultural policies, and the military organization that Wu Zetian had built and maintained. She built something that outlasted the hatred of the people who wrote her history. Let us be honest about what Wu Zetian was. In the same way we are honest about Selim, about Suleiman, about every ruler this channel has covered. She killed people. Many people. Some of them were genuine threats to her power. Some of them were innocent of anything, except being in her way or being related to someone in her way. The surveillance network she built created an atmosphere of terror that destroyed lives. Indiscriminately, the hawks and owls did not confine themselves to actual enemies, because the system incentivized accusation, whether the accusation was true or not. Her own family was not safe. She had relatives demoted, exiled, executed when she perceived them as threats or inconveniences. The ruthlessness that she deployed against external enemies, she deployed with equal consistency against her own blood when circumstances required it. And the baby. The question of her infant daughter sits at the center of everything and cannot be resolved. If she did it, if she killed her own child as a calculated political move, then she did something that places her in a category of ruthlessness that is difficult to find language for. If she did not, if the baby died of natural causes and Wu Zetian simply recognized and seized the political opportunity the death presented, then she is guilty of something different but not necessarily lesser. Either way, a baby died and Wu Zetian used that death to destroy her rival and take her place. She knew what she was doing. She did it anyway. This is the pattern that runs through her entire story. She was not someone who stumbled into power or had it handed to her or inherited it through fortunate birth. She built it, piece by piece, decision by decision, cost by cost. Every step forward on her path required something to be destroyed. A rival, an institution, a principle, a person. She paid every price without visible hesitation, and she ended up on the dragon throne. After Wu Zetian died in 705, at 80 years old, having ruled in various capacities for half a century, the men who wrote her history made a decision. They decided she was a monster. This was not a neutral historical judgment. It was a motivated one. The Confucian scholar class that dominated Chinese historical writing had spent decades watching a woman dismantle every principle they believed in about the natural order of governance. A woman holding the title of emperor was not simply politically inconvenient to them. It was cosmically wrong, a violation of principles they considered as fundamental as gravity. So they wrote her that way. Every cruelty was documented in detail. Every execution, every torture, every suspicious death was preserved and emphasized. Her administrative successes were acknowledged, grudgingly when they could not be denied entirely, then immediately surrounded with qualifications and context designed to minimize them. Her sexuality was weaponized. Confucian historians wrote extensively about her alleged lovers, implying that her power was fundamentally sexual in nature rather than political or administrative. This is a rhetorical move so old and so familiar that it barely needs identifying. When a woman holds power that men believe she should not hold, the explanation offered is almost always that she used her body to get it. The implication is that the power was never really hers, it was borrowed from the men who desired her. Wu Zetian's actual record, the examination reforms, the agricultural policies, the administrative restructuring contradicts this framing completely. You do not run the most populous empire on Earth for 15 years through sexuality. You run it through intelligence, organization, and the willingness to make hard decisions and enforce them. She made hard decisions. She enforced them. What is remarkable is that even through the filter of historians who despised her and were motivated to present her as a cautionary tale, enough of the truth survived to make the real picture visible. She is, in modern China, a genuinely complex historical figure, neither simply celebrated nor simply condemned, but argued about, studied, debated, taken seriously as a political actor rather than dismissed as an anomaly or a villain. Outside China, in the Western world, she remains largely unknown. That is the gap this video exists to fill. Because Wu Zetian belongs in the same conversation as Selim the Grim, as Suleiman the Magnificent, as Mehmed the Conqueror, she belongs in the conversation about power, what it takes to get it, what it costs to keep it, what it does to the person holding it. She just did it in a world that told her from birth that the conversation was not hers to join. She joined it anyway. She ended it as emperor.